Hey, Slater Crusaders. America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. We've said many times on this show that there is not a single cultural institution that is controlled by conservatives. So you think K through 12, colleges, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, the music industry, TV, you name it. Everything is controlled by progressives, except AM talk radio. And that is entirely because of Rush Limbaugh. Rush made AM talk radio. He made it a conservative medium. He was the first syndicated person to be on the AM band, and he was so good that no liberal could join the same station, right? So you got Rush on the station, and we're like, well, who do we fill in the other time slots? And no liberal could, it wouldn't work. Rush was too good. So a bunch of other little Rushes would join in and fill out the rest of the day, and that created, over the last 33 years, the single cultural force that conservatives still own in America. And we owe it entirely to Rush Limbaugh. I've been in talk radio for 13 years. I've always wanted to since I was a kid. Everyone copies Rush. Period. You put your own spin on it, of course, but everyone copies Rush. Rush was born into a successful family, judges, lawyers. I think his grandpa was like the ambassador to India or something like that. But he was the black sheep of the family. He was the total black sheep, always. One thing Rush would tell you is that he was a quitter. He was a quitter. He quit everything he ever did. He quit Boy Scouts. He quit college. He dropped out after 1 year at Southeast Missouri State. Hated school. Hated all that, but loved radio. Ever since he was a kid. His famous line is, my mom would be fixing me breakfast and I'd be listening to the guy on the radio and he'd be having fun. And I was preparing to go to prison. To me, this is the story of Rush Limbaugh. This is the story. And you can think of Rush however, you listen to him. I heard someone say a nice line. They said, I do not have a single memory of getting into my dad's car after school without Rush Limbaugh being on the radio, right? So everyone's got their Rush memory. To me, this is the story of Rush Limbaugh. And the picture that I will always have of Rush Limbaugh is the 9-year-old boy. Rush Limbaugh was a 9-year-old boy. His name was Rusty. They called him Rusty. He was Rush Limbaugh III, so he was Rusty. And he got a toy radio. We got a picture of it, actually. That was it. That was his toy radio. And it could transmit on the AM band up to 500 feet. So imagine 9-year-old Rusty in his bedroom playing records and talking into his microphone on the radio, on an actual AM radio, to an audience of one. His mom in the kitchen. That was the beginning of Rush's radio career. 9-year-old in his bedroom broadcasting to his mom downstairs. And he said his parents encouraged it. They didn't like it that much, but they encouraged it because he quit everything else. He was just quit everything. So they encouraged it because he liked it and he wasn't going to quit it. Never knowing, of course, what it would turn into. His first job, he was 13, he shined shoes at a local barbershop. He lived about 100 miles outside St. Louis. 16 was when he got his first job at a radio station. He worked there before and after school. And that was the beginning of a long career of getting fired. He just got fired all the time. First in Pittsburgh, then in Kansas City. And actually, when he got fired in Kansas City, he quit radio forever. He started to work for the Kansas City Royals, the baseball team. He was a ticket salesman. 5 years of that, he quit that, and then went back into radio. He was a news commentator. And then he got fired again for being too controversial, and then he moved to Sacramento. And that was it. He said when he moved to Sacramento, all the hosts on the radio were doing the same stuff. They were interviewing the, which one of these, like he didn't say, I was gonna say, it wasn't dog catcher, it was sewage director. They were interviewing the sewage director and the latest carrot cake recipe expert for your holiday party. But in 3 weeks, there was gonna be a presidential election and nobody was talking about it. And that was the beginning, 1988. Two main influences on Rush Limbaugh's life outside of his family. I'm always interested in who influenced people. because you just keep going back and back and back, right? That's like, who influenced you look at someone today and they're like, oh, who influenced you? Oh, the Beatles. Okay, well, who influenced the Beatles? Okay, well, Elvis. Well, who influenced Elvis? These people. Okay, well, who influenced? And you just keep going back and back. I find that interesting. So there are two main influences in Rush's life outside of his family. Intellectually, it was Bill Buckley. Rush hated school. He said it felt like, oh, there's Rush on firing line. Rush hated school. Said it felt like he was in prison. He hated being controlled. He hated being dominated. But he loved reading Bill Buckley's newspaper column. When he was 12 years old, he started reading Bill Buckley's column in the local St. Louis paper, and he said he was mesmerized. His family would eat dinner around the table every night, which is a relic of a thing. You know, there's many homes today that don't even have a dinner table. They don't even have a table to sit around. Anyway, he says that was, incredibly influential for him because his dad, everyone was talking and all this. But outside of that, the single greatest motivation, Rush says, that he ever had to learn to read, write, and expand his vocabulary was Bill Buckley. So he goes off to college, quits, comes home, tells his dad he's quitting college. Now Rush's dad grew up in the Depression and was a pilot, and he said he thought you can only succeed, and maybe this was true at the time, that you can only succeed if you have a college degree. So here you are dropping out, you're gonna be a failure. And the family was very worried. And Rush said, Dad, don't worry. Because you can see this conversation, right? Dad's like, what are you gonna do with your life, right? And Rush said, I wanna be like Bill Buckley. His dad said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And Rush said, well, I wanna be able to sit around and write and think and speak. He said his dad blew up at him. He said, what are you talking about? His dad started to get a 2-hour lecture. Where do you think Bill Buckley went to become what he is? You think Bill Buckley just sits around and writes and thinks and speaks and people like you have a reaction to him just because he does it? Like, what are you stupid kid? You can't just be Bill Buckley. And Rush said at that moment he got a serious lecture on how hard and time-consuming achievement is. And it stuck with him, as lectures rarely do. Today we tell kids, I think, to follow your passion. Right, you hear that all the time. Oh, you gotta follow your passion, kids. That's garbage advice. We overemphasize the passion, and we underemphasize the importance of having skill. We talk a lot about the stages of masculinity and the different aspects of masculinity, and one of them is the warrior archetype. And the warrior is loyal and decisive and mindful and purposeful and disciplined, but also skillful. And we skip over that part. Right? You could be the most loyal protector ever, but if you can't use a weapon, you're worthless. You're totally worthless. Passion's good, but that must translate into skill. Otherwise, what good is the passion? And that you can only translate passion into skill through hard work. And Rush said it was that speech from his dad when he really started to learn and absorb everything he could about Bill Buckley and about conservatism. The problem is Bill Buckley can be difficult to understand. So what did Rush add? He added entertainment and fun. So Rush took the intellect of Bill Buckley and digested it and was able to present it to 35 million people across the country over 33 years. How do you do that, right? How do you get 35 million people to listen to you? Well, you gotta be entertaining. Which leads us to the second main influence in Rush Limbaugh's life. The first, intellectually, was Bill Buckley, and the second came from a Chicago shock jock, Larry Lujack. Larry Lujack is where the shuffling of papers came from, but more importantly, it's where the bravado came from. It's where the persona, talent on loan from God. I have half my brain tied behind my back just to make it fair. That's Larry Lujack. So I never heard of Larry Lujack. So I looked up a clip of Larry Lujack. This is the first clip I found. I didn't go searching for him. This is the very first clip I found of Larry Lujack. And this is Rush Limbaugh. This is the Rush Limbaugh show, persona, excellence in broadcasting, golden microphone. This is the whole thing. It's like a minute long. But even the very beginning, Larry Lujack here, he says, Oh, hold on. I'm gonna take a second out of my very busy broadcasting day. Like, that's a classic Rush. This whole storyline and the artistry of it. So influenced by this guy. So anyway, take a listen.
I take just a moment from my busy broadcast schedule here at Super CFL to thank all of you for the lovely birthday cards that I've received today. Some of them were just filthy, too. A lot of smutty minds out there in rock and roll radio land. But anyway, thank you. Dear Mr. Lujak, my little 11-year-old daughter is a great fan of yours. She listens to your program all the time. She also is a runaway. But we get a lot of letters like this from, like small towns in Indiana, and Michigan, and Wisconsin, and Iowa, from parents whose kids run away to the big city, Chicago, bright lights. That's where it's happening, except it's not. If you're contemplating runaway, for God's sakes, don't come here. There's nothing happening here except a lot of sex perverts and senseless violence and murders. You come to Chicago, you'll be lucky to make it out of the bus terminal alive. So all you kids who are runaways who might be listening to this radio station this afternoon, at least call your folks, because you're making them miserable. And be sure and call collect.
So good. That's so good. I've heard that clip like 10 times now. And you can hear it, the exact same bit with Rush's voice, right? It could have been from Rush's show himself. Anyway, those are his two influences. Success is really interesting. How to become successful, right? What's the recipe? One last clip here from Larry Lujak. He was doing an interview show. This was in 1982. And he was asked, at the beginning of this question, something like, how important is your voice, right? The sound of your voice. And Lujak starts out, he's like, man, not that important, actually, anymore. Here's what really matters.
Along with X amount of talent and a hell of a lot of luck, I think there's also an intangible something that you either have or you don't have. And if you don't have it, no amount of teaching will do any good. It's you either got it or you don't. Whatever that intangible is, I don't know.
Rush had it. On top of that, all the hard work. Coming up next, I want to play a clip here. This is from 1994. We'll explain it in a second. It's a speech he gave in 1994. I want to play a couple clips, and I think it's the Rush Doctrine. There's 5 points to it. It's the Rush Doctrine, and it also reveals who he really was as a person as well. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, talking about Rush Limbaugh for another segment here. Rush was also a notorious tipper. And not 20% or 100% even, like $5,000 tips, like crazy, crazy tips. And the only reason we know this is because every once in a while there'd be a waitress who got a $5,000 tip, and she hated Rush Limbaugh. So she would give that money to an abortion center because it was blood money, and the media would take that story and they'd tell it as like a dunk on Limbaugh. But in doing so, they revealed to everyone that Rush Limbaugh left $5,000 tips regularly. Which again reveals a little bit about who Rush really is. Just to make this selfish for a second, and then I want to play some clips here. I just thought of this because of that waitress who hates Rush. My mom's a Democrat, hates Trump, whole thing. My earliest Rush memory, I distinctly remember this. I was in the car with my mom. I was like 12 years old. I remember exactly where we were. We were at the stoplight right downtown in my little town where I grew up. And I turned on the radio, and Rush Limbaugh's on. And my mom said, "Oh, turn that off. I am not listening to Rush Limbaugh." I and I said, I love Rush Limbaugh, right? The guy right there on the spot, right? People hated him. But it's because he's that good. I want to play some clips of his speech here. This is 1994, the freshman orientation for congressmen, first newly elected congressman. This is when the Republicans took over the House, right? So it was a big deal. It's a 20-minute speech he gave. I cut it down to just 5 parts that I think really show nicely the Rush Doctrine. Clip 1.
This country is conservative. It has been for a long time. Get used to it. You tried to change it and you failed, and tonight proves it.
First one. I believe that to be true as well. I certainly have believed that to be true, that we are a conservative country at our core and in our hearts. We had a wonderful guest on yesterday. He's running for Congress in Louisiana. And he said the same thing yesterday about black voters in his district. He's outside Baton Rouge. And he said the same thing. He goes, I go knock on doors and everything, and all these black families that I talk to, they're all conservative. They live conservatively. But there's a disconnect between their values and the policies and the people that they vote for. There's a big disconnect here. And he said, Republicans, we need to do a better job of connecting the values that people have naturally in their hearts to conservative policies. So that's the first thing. That's the first point of Rush's doctrine, that people are conservative. Definitely most, are conservative by their nature. That's first. Second point.
This is a key, and I think that all of you should never forget this, because these reporters who were asking me questions about talk radio were all trying to say, in a roundabout way, that I took a bunch of brainless people and converted them to mind-numbed robots, and every day would send out code in my show that would force them to march to the polls on November the 8th and pull the lever I wanted them to pull. And the fact of the matter is, that's not what's happening. There may be some talk show hosts who do that, and there may be some talk shows. I don't think they're the majority. I think that the reason you're sitting here tonight and liberals aren't is that you understand that the American people are intelligent, they are aware, they care, and they know what's going on, and they are not a bunch of mind-numbed robots. They may have been at one time and have awakened from it now. And what happens on talk radio is real simple. We validate what's in people's hearts and minds already. These people are living their lives conservatively. They care about what happens to their kids. They care about their own futures. I mean, to think that I came along and got people concerned about those things for the first time in their lives is ludicrous.
So good. So no one gets brainwashed into conservatism. It's in your heart already. And what we do here on this show and on my radio show is hopefully give you the words to better express the things that you already know to be true. Does that make sense? There's no brainwashing going on. There's no trickery going on here. You know these things to be true. You feel them. Like they're here. They're in your heart and your mind and your soul, as Rush mentioned. But I can't quite get them out, right? So hopefully we help you articulate those things. Third point of the Rush Doctrine.
One of the questions I was asked as the reporters were peppering me was, do you think Newt will moderate his stance now that he's the Speaker of the House? And I said, better not.
Don't soften your stance. Conservatives are always compromising to the left, always. And for what? Now, why do these politicians cave so often and so easily? Point 4.
You're coming into the Beltway, inside the Beltway. And as we're all human beings, and we all are susceptible to human nature, and we all want to be liked, we all want to be loved, and you all want to live in surroundings which are not hostile. But inside the Beltway, for people like us, this is not possible. And so sometimes, to avoid the hostility, we say things and then begin to do things designed to gain the approval of those who are hostile toward us. I want to warn you against it. I want to warn you, you will never, ever be their friends. They don't want to be your friends. Some female reporter will come up to one of you and start batting her eyes and ask you to go to lunch. And you'll think, wow, I'm only a freshman. Cokie Roberts wants to take me to lunch. I've really made it. Seriously, don't fall for this. This is not the time to get moderate. This is not the time to start trying to be liked. This is not the time to start gaining the approval of the people you've just defeated.
They don't want to be your friends. If you're a Republican, you're an extremist. So don't moderate your principles that you know to be true, because these people don't want to be your friends. Don't be tricked by them. They'll stab you behind your back. Just look at the horrible things people have said about Rush himself last day, right? The same people who are telling you we need to unite are saying that Rush needs to rot in hell, okay? They don't want to be your friends. Last clip.
Say what you believe with passion and bravado, and you're going to offend half the people who hear it by virtue of statistics. You can't let that bother you. You got to look at that as a definition of effectiveness. Now, I'm not talking about personally offending somebody. I'm talking about offending them politically. That's going to happen, and you can't avoid it. And you have to learn to take that as some measure or some side of success, because it means you're doing something.
Good. So obviously don't intentionally, personally offend someone, because we're fighting ideas, right? It's very similar. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, the powers of the dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Similar thing here, right? We're against ideas in this conservative movement. So you offend someone, if you offend someone, when you rebuke their bad ideas, they're going to be all bothered by it. Don't let that bother you. Right? You're attacking their ideas. And yeah, people associate their ideas with themselves too much, but that's their problem. It's for their own good, even, to rebuke their ideas. It gets them closer to the truth. So these are the 5 points. Most people are conservative by nature. People listen to talk radio and shows like this, stations like this, not so much for just affirmation, but because we're always looking for the words to articulate what's in our hearts and our minds already. Third, don't soften your stance. Don't cave. People on the left, they don't want to be your friends. Or I say like partisans on the left don't want to be your friends. So don't be tricked. And don't be bothered when you offend people when you're attacking ideas. I think that's the Rush Doctrine right there. Mark Stein filled in for Rush a lot. And he wrote a nice tribute the other day. He talked about the first time he heard Rush's show. He was driving with some friends from London to Maine, and they were in Maine. And there was a dead zone where no radio stations came in. So he just pressed the scan button, and he accidentally just left it going. He just left the, right? Remember the old scan button? I don't even know if they still have this, but just scanning. So they're driving, they're chit-chatting, they're talking, and the radio scanning. It doesn't get anything for a long time. And then finally, boom, it stops. It found some guy. And Mark Stein says this guy was talking about the arts and croissants crowd moving into your town. And this guy started reading a press release from NOW, which was the National Association of Women, whom he called the NAGs, the National Association of Gals. And he started playing Andy Williams' Born Free with gunfire as he was talking about an animal environmental story. And everyone in the car was like, what is it? Everyone, like the conversation stopped and they could not stop listening. The National Association for Gals. The final line of Mark Stein's piece, the piece is called The Indispensable Man. And Mark has a great line. He says, I'm well aware of the ironies of the headline, right? The Indispensable Man. He says, my father liked to caution me that the graveyard is full of indispensable men. But all of us who labored in Rush's shadows owe it to him. Because I believe it, we would not be here without him, and we need to continue the fight. And Stein had a great ending, and I'm going to steal it from him. He said, to modify Rush's tagline, talent returned to God. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I got some headlines here, really important headlines from the news. CNN, inside the new president's routine, Oval Office fires and early bedtimes. And of course, they talk about his dogs. The media loves talking about Joe Biden's dogs. Newsweek, Joe Biden playing as Luigi wins in Mario Kart race against granddaughter at Camp David. It's a real thing. The Hill, Kamala Harris jogs stairs at Lincoln Memorial in viral clip. Vanity Fair, Joe Biden normaled particularly hard this weekend. It's gonna be 4 years of that. 4 years of getting updates on his Mario Kart playing. Now these are obviously silly. It gets more serious when the media lies. You know, one of the Capitol Hill police officers, Officer Sicknick, one of the officers who died on January 6th at the Capitol riot, the original reporting was that he was hit in the head with a fire extinguisher. And he died from that. This is the New York Times. This is the original article from the New York Times. Pro-Trump rioters attacked that citadel of democracy, overpowered Mr. Sicknick, and struck him in the head with a fire extinguisher, according to 2 law enforcement officials. With a bloody gash in his head, Mr. Sicknick was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support. He died on Thursday evening. So, that never happened. It didn't happen. The House impeachment managers, the Democrats, they used this story to build a case against the former president, but it never happened. The New York Times retracted the story. Millions and millions of people, through New York Times and every other outlet that picked up on that, kept talking about how he was murdered by the rioters with a fire extinguisher to the head. And no one will ever hear that the record has been corrected on that, except for you, right here, right now. I got a better one for you. So the media needed and continues to need to frame what happened at that riot at the Capitol. They need to frame it as every senator and congressman narrowly escaped death. It was a near-death experience for everyone. And the rioters were coming in and they were going to tie him up and kill him. They were going to behead them all. That's how they need to frame it. Now, that's absurd. As we've talked about so many times before, these boobs had no idea what they were doing in there. They were meandering about, walking about. They had no idea what's going on. But then this picture came out. This picture looks menacing. Do you see what's in his hand? Zip ties. This picture right here is proof that the rioters came prepared to tie up senators and murder them. Because that's what we do with movies in our head. Put that picture back up. That's an amazing picture. And that picture is so compelling. You see that and you just immediately, right? He's wearing black, his face covered. You're like, your brain just goes into overdrive, coming up with a movie in your head. The truth is, and the prosecutors admit this. I want to be clear. This isn't just that guy's excuse. The prosecutors against him admit this. That when he broke into the Capitol with his mom, he found those zip ties sitting on a table. They were the Capitol Hill police officer's zip ties. They weren't his zip ties. He found them and he grabbed them. He says he grabbed them so that they wouldn't be used against the rioters. Now, I'm not saying that was a wise thing to do. I'm not defending him, by no means. But that's very different than he brought these zip ties for the express purpose of tying up senators and beheading them. And it's just one guy, too. That's the other. It was just him. It's not like they all brought zip ties. It's amazing. Every day there's a new lie, and then a couple weeks go by, and then we find out the truth, and by then we're way past it. The drive-by media, as Rush used to call them. Lies continue every day. Some of them have disastrous consequences. So we started out with silly stories in the media, and then we have that one, which is more consequential. But then we have stories and lies that have disastrous consequences. We don't have time to do all this today because we have a wonderful guest coming up next, but talking about the PRO Act. But there is and we'll do more of this next week, but there is a massive revolt going on, certainly here in California, but I know other cities as well, where schools are still closed. Schools are still closed in California, or public schools are still closed, I should say. Private schools are open. And parents are ticked off. This is the New York Times. New York Times, they asked 175 pediatric disease experts if it's safe to open schools. The New York Times asked, and 86% of them said, yeah, we don't need everyone to be vaccinated. Kids need to go back to school. 86%. Okay, and those are the pediatric disease experts that the New York Times chose to poll. So why are they not? At least here in California, Chicago, and other places, it's all about the money. The unions want more money, and they've never had parents over a barrel like this before. The schools are closed. Right? You have no bargaining chip. They are demanding obscene amounts of money, and they'll get it. They'll get it in the end. Look what they're willing to do to get that money. Keep your kids out of school for over a year. I know Fairfax, Virginia is pushing until all kids are vaccinated. That's well into 2022. We haven't even tested the vaccine on kids under 18 yet. That's what they're demanding for money. And we still believe this lie that they care about our kids. It's insane. San Francisco Gate, San Francisco newspaper, they interviewed parents and teachers and kids in San Francisco. And they said, they asked people in San Francisco to write emails about their experience with school being closed. And they said they were inundated with emails from parents who are distraught. They said their kids are angry, lonely, agoraphobic. Agoraphobic means you're scared to go outside. Listless, sedentary, disconnected from friends, glued to video games, apathetic about school, either losing or gaining weight, failing classes. Kids are having panic attacks, not from COVID, but from being afraid that they'll never get their lives back. Kids giving up on their dreams, giving up on going to college. They're unmotivated, and of course, many committing suicide. It's terrible. And the unions don't care a lick. The teachers' unions don't care. Gavin Newsom doesn't care. Joe Biden doesn't care. Now, on the other hand, one parent wrote in and said their kids are thriving. They said one of their kids has advanced 2 grade levels because they have private tutors that come in every day. And that's the point I want to make here. The left screams nonstop. All the time they're screaming about inequality. And then they shut down public schools. And you have a vast majority of kids who are literally going crazy and falling behind. And we're not going to see the ramifications of that for years and years and years to come fully, right? So these kids are falling behind, a vast majority of kids falling behind emotionally, intellectually, and everything. And then you have a very, very small percentage. I don't know, let's call it 1%. We'll call them the 1%ers. Have private tutors coming in, and they're thriving like never before. One parent wrote about her and her kids. They walk past this private school every single day. And the mom said, every day we see these kids playing in a blocked off street. They're screaming, laughing, playing kickball, having fun. They're so happy. They're together. And I walk by with my kids, and because this is like the only time we can get out of the house, and they say, Mom, why are those kids allowed to go to school? Is it because they have money? And Mom says, yes, that's exactly why, darling. Because in our society, we've decided that money gets you certain privileges. And in this case, it's being allowed to go to school. And I hear that. I'm like, are you kidding me? It's progressives doing this, lady. Right? And I read that, I'm like, holy cow, they're going to spin this like it's conservatives who made it this way. They're going to spin this like it's a greedy conservative thing. Are you kidding? You could, from the people who complain about inequality all the time, you could not conceive of a policy that would create more inequality than shutting down schools for the year. And somehow it's our fault. Somehow in San Francisco, it's conservatives' fault. Right? It's crazy. In Chicago, it's conservative. You know these bastions of conservatism? And all these parents who are complaining about this, all the parents who wrote into the San Francisco Gate to complain about this and how their kids are literally dying because of this, they're all going to vote for the same Democrats. They're going to vote for the same Democrats in San Francisco. They're going to vote for the same Democrats on the school board. They're going to vote for Gavin Newsom to be governor again. And they're going to be shocked when this continues on and on forever. Remember, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom's kids have been meeting in their private school in person for months. You want to talk about inequality? True story. Mike Slater. Coming up next, we'll talk about the PRO Act, which is a California thing that's now moving nationwide. Talk about that next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So there was a, let me say this first. I used to live in Tennessee and I have a radio show in Tennessee, and we would always talk about California stories. Because if something was happening in California, it was just a matter of time before it swept its way across the entire country. So being here in California, I'm telling you about something that's coming nationwide, and that is AB 5. When AB 5 first passed in California, no one had any idea what it was. No one saw it coming, no one knew what was going on, and then it passed, and so many people were like, wait, what? And even the person who wrote it, don't even get me started on Lorena Gonzalez, had admitted her failures in it, but of course doubled down because it was all for the unions. All right, all that being said, let's bring in PATRICE ONWUKA, who's a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. PATRICE, how are you today?
Oh, I'm great, Mike. How are you?
Good, thanks for being here, and thanks for letting us all know about the PRO Act. But again, let's start with AB 5. So what is AB 5 in California?
Assembly Bill 5 is a horror story. It's a job-killing legislation that really reclassifies millions of the state's independent contractors as employees, maybe thousands. But in essence, it says, you are an employee unless you can prove otherwise. And it dates back to a state Supreme Court case. I won't go into that. But the quick and dirty is that many people who are independent contractors, think about your English to Spanish translators, your marketing professionals, optometrists, event planners, musicians, performers. All of those individuals tend to do, they're not employees of companies. They're individual people. They're entrepreneurs, small business owners, and they get 1099s after they get paid every year, and they file their own taxes and pay their own taxes. But the state said, no, we think that you should be an employee of a company and force their hand. And unfortunately, a lot of people lost income, they lost reliable jobs, they lost contracts, and they found themselves out in the cold right before the pandemic hit. So imagine the pandemic has even been harder on them.
I remember it affecting writers as well. Wasn't there? What was the deal with writers? They could only write a certain number of pieces a year.
So this bill is really sinister in that it carved out like lots of different exemptions for some people who had the money to lobby and get their special protections. Writers, what they did is they said you can only submit 35 different pieces of content to one provider each year. Well, if you're a columnist, you can blow through that limit pretty quickly. And that meant that a lot of writers, suddenly found themselves without jobs. I'll give you a great example of Vox Media. Everybody knows that left-leaning news outlet. They hailed this as a win for workers everywhere. Then they turned around and fired 200 of their freelance writers because they know they couldn't afford the increased costs of bringing all of those people on board as employees. I mean, that's the other side of this, which is you're going to force a company to bring their independent contractors on as employees. You pay them their wages, you're paying healthcare, you're paying all of those mandated labor costs. They're not going to be able to afford it, which is why they tend to go the independent contracting route to begin with. So what happens? Those workers, they end up with no jobs, no contracts, no opportunity. And that's what we saw happen.
What a perfect example of the left dealing only in utopia land and not considering trade-offs and unintended consequences. The perfect example. And I remember that was the thing that people criticized Lorena Gonzalez for, the 35 limit. And they're like, why'd you guys make up 35? And she's like, I don't know. We just made it up. It just totally made it up. She admitted it, we just made it up. Wow, it's insane. Okay, so the part 2 of that story is Prop 22. So for everyone not in California, we have tons of props every year. It's crazy. And every election, people are voting on different, like direct democracy kind of things. And I hate them all, but I hate that system, but that's a different day. So one of them was Prop 22. It was the most expensive proposition ever in California, $205 million on the yes side. And it was sponsored by Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and all those companies, right? Because why? How did AB 5 affect them?
Well, all of those drivers, those deliveries, the secret shoppers, whatever, they are independent contractors. They are not employees, so they don't receive benefits. They get paid, sure, and then they get 1099s at the end of the year and they file their own taxes. It's a business model that works in the gig economy, but it would not work as if these companies had to hire them as full employees. They simply could not afford to do it. And so that's why these companies banded together and did a really great public education campaign about Prop 22 to say, no, if you want to protect these workers' ability to earn flexibly, earn their own pay on their schedule, around their own priorities, let them do so. Push back on AB 5 with Prop 22, and they successfully did so. The overwhelming number of voters in California said, yes, we support Prop 22, we support flexibility and independence for all of those drivers. It's good in that it was great for drivers and Uber, Lyft drivers, but there's still so many other independent contractors right there in California who are stuck under the thumb of AB 5.
Yeah, it passed 5841, which is pretty unheard of in California for anything to pass like that. But as you said, the problem was it only exempted ride shares like that. And that was the argument against voting for it, was they should have spent that money to just get rid of the bill completely. And they didn't. They just carved out themselves, which is pretty frustrating. Let me throw you a little devil's advocate, Patrice. So let me speak for Lorena Gonzalez. These companies are cheating the American people out of hard-earned benefits. They're doing an end around with these new gig business models that are impoverishing people. And if you really want to stay in business, it's your responsibility to provide benefits and health insurance to all these people. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Congresswoman, did you ask, or representative, sorry, I'm not even going to give you a boost yet. Did you ask the independent contractors what they want? When you actually poll independent contractors like those Uber drivers, those Lyft drivers, 71% of them say that they prefer being independent contractors over being employees, recognizing that there's a trade-off, that they're not receiving certain benefits, but they're receiving flexibility. When you talk to these people, and we at Independent Women's Forum, we launched a campaign, and we've talked to independent contractors across your state to ask them about what this bill has meant to them. And it has meant the loss of their flexibility. We're talking about moms who are caregivers for aging parents. I spoke to a woman who was a rape survivor and a murder survivor who could not sit behind a regular desk and have a 9-to-5 job, but could remain attached to the labor force because of independent contracting. Your bill takes that away from a woman like that. It takes opportunity away from a retiree whose Social Security is not enough to supplement their income. So they drive for Uber. Maybe they're delivering meals through DoorDash. They want flexibility. They're not looking for benefits. And many of them, especially women, who, by the way, make up 46% of the independent contracting workforce, they get benefits through their spouses' full-time jobs. So they're not necessarily looking for benefits. They're looking for flexibility. And hey, maybe you are well-intended with your bill, but you're causing a lot more harm than good.
Well, that is a perfect response. Okay, so let's make this relevant to everybody else listening who's not in California. What is the PRO Act?
The Protecting the Right to Organize Act, introduced in Congress, just reintroduced 2 weeks ago. It sounds wonderful. It sounds like it's a win for workers. It is not. It is. It's going to be inflict an incredible amount of damage on independent contractors nationwide. In short, it takes AB 5 and elevates it across the country. However, it doesn't have the exemptions for different occupations like AB 5 has. It means everybody is going to be under the thumb. This is an assault on flexibility. It is an assault on your choice as a worker to determine whether you want to be a full employee of a company or whether you want to be your own small business owner and entrepreneur and hire out your talent and your time to whomever you want. The PRO Act, that is just one angle of the PRO Act, which is taking that AB 5 independent contracting aspect national. The PRO Act also has a whole other host of other union giveaways. It would repeal right-to-work laws in 27 states, meaning you can no longer, your money has to pay for membership dues with unions, even if you're not a member. Your private information can be forcibly sent over to unions, and they can harass you without your permission. So there are a lot of great, wonderful things for unions in the PRO Act, but let's not mince words here. This is not about protecting your flexibility or your freedoms and your choice in the workforce. It is about taking it away.
Brutal. Okay, we got one more minute, Patrice. What are some of those exemptions that AB 5 has, professions, that
everything.
is not in the PRO Act?
Sure. So you saw a lot of the organized associations, the industry associations like, the dentists, the medical professionals, they were able to get exemptions. Truckers were fighting for exemptions. I mean, there's over 100 different occupations across the state in California that were able to receive exemptions. The writers, freelance writers and journalists, they made enough noise. They had a pretty big pulpit to make noise, and they were able to get an exemption as well from AB 5. But there are still a host of other smaller folks, marketing professionals, event planners, Santa Claus. We did a video with a professional Santa Claus. All of these types of performers, individuals who still did not get an exemption. And by the way, as I said before, the PRO Act has 0 exemptions for any industries. Exemptions are not the right way. They're undemocratic, and it is just pay for play. This bill is wrong. The PRO Act is wrong on many fronts, but especially on independent contracting.
Super corrupt. Patrice, that's one of the most articulate examinations of any bill I've ever heard in my life. Where can people learn more?
Please go to IWF.org. We've got tons of resources and, more importantly, videos of people who can tell you in their own words how the AB 5 has hit them and what the PRO Act will do nationwide. What's the
timeline on this bill? When are they going to be voting on it, et cetera?
I'm going to guess they're going to wait till after the coronavirus stimulus package gets voted on, potentially later next week or mid-March. So it's been reintroduced. It's probably going to head to committees, and then we'll see. So sometime, I'm expecting this year sometime. So we are definitely keeping an eye out.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch. IWF.org, Patrice ONWUKA. Thanks, Patrice.
Thank you.
That was superb. All right, tomorrow we got our special. See you then. Mike Slater, spread the word.